this comes from Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, that was famous. All the other things Thomas Kuhn did afterwards were kind of, but that one book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, was a bestseller, which, considering it was a history of science book, so that wasn't really the kind of but what he points out is that scientific revolutions are social revolutions, and they're not necessarily revolutions in the sense that science is continuing to march onward, solving problem after problem. But instead, when you analyze the individuals involved in a scientific revolution, what you end up finding is that the children of the people in the bureaucracy that are living as the status quo are not the ones that revolt. It's the smart kids that have been beneficiaries of the training and opportunities, but reach a certain point in the bureaucracy that they can't replace the individuals that are at the top of the structure, because the paternalism of the bureaucracy are going to benefit their own children instead of those folks that are on the outer edges of that bureaucracy. So they end up working on problems that the bureaucracy is not especially interested in. And as they continue to work on those problems, they end up coming up with new theories that are necessary in order to solve those problems. And once they do that, then they literally end up with a physical replacement of the bureaucracy. And that transforms them from the old paradigm to a new paradigm that they've created in order to solve the problems that they were interested in. And so it's basically a real revolution in that positions are lost by the old established people, and the new so it's a real revolution in that sense. So it's a social revolution, not just science progressing, right? And then the same thing happens again. Well, those are the same individuals that tend to be involved in revolutions like the Marxist revolutions. Those were students that got people in the workforce started in the revolution and led them, but they were students. They learned how to get a revolution going, but they actually didn't know diddly squat about running an economy or a government afterwards. So of course they ended up being thrown out and replaced by the thugs that basically knew how to push people around.
So do you think society is still set up for that revolution?
We've just, in the last few years, I've seen several different protests, like in New York and in Seattle. We had a few people here that wanted to protest too, and it's students that are interested in doing that and want to change things, but when you talk to them, they don't really know how to fix things, right? But those were the ones in New York, and protesting the wealthy and trying to camp in the park and all that sort of thing. So yeah, we of course still have that. It's the same group in Tahrir Square that tried to and did overthrow the Egyptian
And then in Germany,
President,
it's like, if you don't look at
Mubarak.
every
Right, that was
single scientifically
like 06 or
researched
something?
fact that you can.
I don't remember which year, but yeah,
Well,
they overthrew Mubarak, but then were disappointed in the results of the election,
Right.
because of course the population of Egypt
And
wasn't
they expect
with
it
them,
upfront,
really.
but in some cultures
They were
don't.
still
You know, the
fundamentalists,
approach
and
to
elected
to
a fundamentalist
very
Muslim
individualistic.
from the Muslim Brotherhood,
We're very individualistic.
which would have made the situation
Like Germany,
worse
Yeah.
than it
some
was
Middle Eastern countries
with Mubarak.
where,
Right? So
very
they went ahead
focused.
and I think supported the army in
And so
throwing
if you go back to the Greek maxims of
uh,
rhetoric, we have like
the Muslim Brotherhood
Belgos,
out
which is
and
in Germany,
replacing it with
and
General
Bast-
Sisi,
that there be,
who's of course still there now, and basically doing the same thing that Mubarak had been doing.
pathos, which is your
But you
emotional,
don't see any indication of a
uh,
possible
collectivist
rebellion, because I
communities
think
are much
in
more
a sense
about
they
person's
learned their
representation
lesson, that
and how they
Egypt isn't
feel
really ready for becoming a
as
modern
people. And if you
nation
know
yet.
them,
Yeah,
Uh,
what I hear is that-
Same sort of thing happened in Syria,
and
that,
so
and
cultural values.
you know, I think Lebanon is actually going through that right now. You know, there's a lot of young people that are rebelling against the Lebanese government right now, and that's only gonna make things worse there, that's not gonna fix it. You can see time and again that these revolutions
No,
don't,
I mean, I think they even.
they end up screwing things up for everyone instead of fixing
I
anything.
think they planned it to be like
What do you think's gonna
3 weeks
happen
or
with,
something. I think they had to stop it after days.
Hong Kong?
Crazy.
That's
So
pretty
who's
scary.
doing your research? Who's doing
It
the-
depends on how much patience the Chinese government has, I think. They're adamant that they're not going to give up on their hold,
Yeah.
and their governor, or the mayor, Madam Liu, or whatever her name is, you know, she's definitely gonna keep face and stay in her position. So my guess is that you'll see that the amount of force step up until it calms everything down. But
It seems like they can just wait them out, you know? China can keep the pressure on for years.
it does seem like they're more hooligans as opposed to business people that are trying to prevent some of their freedoms being removed.
Yeah.
So
Judith and Tim.
So I get the sense that it's the same kind of thing, that there's a lot of young students that are, they have extra time, they're not working as well as, you know, as
Well,
So-
there's a lot,
so I would
mean,
think a lot of
obviously
that.
there's other history there too, that, you know, they don't wanna be, part of the main concept of communism throughout China, they're just not, they're not down with that.
Down
see.
with
No, they're not. They're willing
But
to
they
bring-
are, their culture is bleeding over into China too, and China's aware of that, so that
Yeah.
stuff is going to change in China. You know, and that's, of course, the most populous country in the world.
Makes it hard for us because when do you help, you know, and how do you help and should you help?
Well, I think it's pretty clear we're not going to try to help in that
Not yet.
situation.
Yeah. So we'll see. Hopefully it doesn't ever come.
Taiwan is, of course, another issue. But,
That's been going on for a long time,
oh, yeah,
long time.
yeah.
Yeah, I know, I got a friend that's from Taiwan. He says there's a lot of animosity when, when people ask if he's Chinese, you know, they don't like that. He doesn't like that. His family, I guess, they have a real problem with that.
And he's in Taiwan?
Yeah, well, he's from Taiwan.
Oh, he's here,
Yeah, he's here, yeah.
and people ask if he's Chinese, and that bothers him because he's Taiwanese and not Chinese. I get it, yeah.
I don't think that'll ever end either. I think that group of people die trying.
So, this is Hannah Arendt Blücher's tombstone with her husband. That's in Bard College in upstate New York. If you ever visit Bard College, I don't know that many colleges that actually have cemeteries where they bury their dead professors. That's pretty weird, actually. But they do. So that's intriguing. But yeah, if you get the chance to read some of Hannah Arendt's things, I think she's definitely a fascinating author, still useful today. And some of her current publications, I mean, they're still coming out. So she's in that situation. And Roger Scruton, of course, is
Yep.
so this is an interview done by someone from the Netherlands. It's a series. They have a series of interviews that they do. You know, when he's talking about death, it reminds me though of Hannah Arendt's article that we have. It's only two or three pages, but the topic is eternity versus immortality, and it's kind of interesting when we think of the immortality of the soul. I think a lot of people, when they think of immortality, what they're thinking in terms of hoping for is a life after death, right? In which case, they're thinking of having an eternal life, not dying. But immortality, traditionally, well, so immortality, I guess, would be the word you would use for living without dying, right? But eternity is what normally the soul is considered as being eternal, right? Is this interesting as a difference? Now, what would you prefer? Living for all time without dying? Or what is the alternative? What are you hoping for?
That's an interesting question because I feel like most people that I know, they'd be like, oh, I want to live forever and see what happens in the future. But, like, why would you want to do that? You see so many people, like, die. You'll see family members die and friends, and it sounds like a terrible way to live. So I don't think I would want to because I wouldn't want to see anyone go.
I recently realized that there was an English version of the Dance of the Vampire. Did I send you the link? Did I
don't
send
know.
everybody the link? I don't know if I did or not.
I remember you showing us, but not like the English version.
And so I when I found it that night, I watched it all the way. It was like late at night when I found it, but since I'm not up all day watching sports, I watched it until like 3 a.m. So I watched it till like 3 a.m. And I didn't realize, I suppose it was more of a comedy than I understood from the French or German versions. But at one point, the vampire is explaining to the young lady, what's her name? Sarah, right? Right, Sarah?
I don't know.
So he's explaining to her that the problem with being a vampire is that everybody you know passes away,
Yeah,
and yet you're still going.
but you're still there. Stuck.
Sugar Plum Fairy?
Michael Crawford. What's Original Sin? Oh, this is one of the songs.
I've been looking for an original sin. One with a twist and a bit of a spin that's inside. Come on, the old ones.
This musical was a tremendous flop. That's why I hadn't heard about it, I guess. Had 53 performances and then closed.
Endlessly searching for the original sin. I've been waiting for you since you've been born. I've waited patiently, but not for long. And since I know
So he's the vampire, and she's the young girl that just turned 16? Whatever. Before they put on the show again, they better up her age.
So I bless you with my curse. There are times that you must sever. You'll be better when
I can see one out.
you must die to live forever. I will show you the depths of the night. We can never go wrong. Together we can take it to the end of the night.
Bright eyes.
It's the same composer. So he used it. He's allowed. So part of the, I suppose, mystique of the vampire is this idea that the vampire lives forever. Because they're immortal, but not eternal. So that's kind of, so if traditionally the soul is thought of as eternal, not living immortal, yeah, I'd love to live as long as possible. I'm, of course, familiar with lots of movies and books. You know, I remember Cities in Flight by James Blish. Anybody way back used to like science fiction back then? It was one of my favorite books as a kid. You know, where they, you know, the cities actually took off. You know, so like New York, Philadelphia, you know, the earth was collapsing because of what we had done to it. This is like from the 60s or 50s, right? This book, right? James Blish. You know, where you would even, probably could find it in the library. It read fast. But so all the cities take off and they're flying out in space and, you know, mining other planets and, you know, everything. And of course, because of that, they've got technology that keeps all the residents living forever. And they eventually get to the point where they end up at the end of the universe. And I remember at the very end, the one character, the main character, is out in his spacesuit, and he's trying to just bump something out of its place so that the next reiteration of the universe will be different next time. That was the end of it, So he literally lived forever, but not eternally. So that's kind of intriguing. Yeah. So there's lots of movies, and books and things where you could live forever, get chances to come back into time, travel around, do things, get a new enhanced body, that new Terminator. I always want to call it Toyminator, but the new Terminator movie. You've got Grace. If you've seen it, Grace is like an enhanced human that comes back to fight against Terminators, but she's human instead of a Terminator. So her body has a power source and has all sorts of things, but she's still a human somehow. But at the one point where she's looked at by a medical doctor because she was hurt, and so they're actually looking at her, and the doctors, how could she live with all this stuff in her? Because she's got all these machines and stuff.
She's a cyborg?
I guess you would.
The melding of flesh and...
Yeah, but she still thought of herself as a human.
Well, yeah, I guess if she was born human, generated through human mechanisms
That's
with
great.
technology added,
And they,
versus the Terminator from Terminator 2, or even the first Terminator, who was a machine that organic skin was added to on top of. So the Genesis line is different. Human becoming more machine, machine becoming more human.
She's just a cyborg. is what it is.
Yeah, they're both cyborgs, but they have different origins. Like,
But a cyborg is a human that has mechanical components active.
is it? 'Cause I thought
Never
the
seen one
cyborg
like
was
you
just
before.
put together.
Almost human.
I am human, just enhanced.
Mackenzie Davis's character is really interesting. Is she good? Is she bad? She's definitely not entirely human.
She can stand toe-to-toe with Terminator. Grace comes back from the future
See,
to
exactly the same as all the other Terminator movies.
You, Danny, you're my mission. She is the
Felt
ultimate
birds
protector.
running through the perfect machine.
The thing about it, of course, is instead of being an obvious male character, it's a female character. It's still beating the crap out of the.
How's the language?
Oh, it's R, I'm sure.
Like when you saw it, did you notice?
My wife didn't go,
Okay.
but my two daughters took me, which
Penis
wasn't
bouncing
because they
lines
have
around
my
it.
feelings involved.
Produced by Pfaff.
I had to pay. That's why they took me.
They step back and they're like that.
Daughters they're, in fact, they wanted dinner afterwards, so it was going to be dinner and a show, and I got
have
to
to
pay. I outsmarted them, though. We stopped and bought food and took it home, so my wife got a dinner too, but she didn't eat it because she was so mad because there's tension. You know how that works.
They made because you paid.
Right, because she doesn't like how they manipulate me.
And you don't say
You know.
no.
I can't say no. You kidding?
My dad can either.
Well, my 4-year-old went on a date with my husband yesterday, and that's because he couldn't say no either. So she said she wanted Red Robins and root beer float there, in addition to ice cream afterwards, because she wanted a date with Dad. So date with Dad it was. So
And those are called memories.
Yeah.
You know, those. I still remember eating at a Red Robin. This was when it was behind the Northway Mall.
mm-hmm.
You remember that? It's behind the Northway Mall. and Kat, who was just little, had a vanilla milkshake. And we were sitting there at the table, and she reached for her milkshake and dumped it in my lap. And that was cold. And so I said so. I said, that is very cold. That's how I reacted to it. And that was on purpose, because I remembered when my dad reacted to my one brother dumping a glass of milk in his lap at the Fernwood Diner. And he stood up and yelled and said, geez, this is the last time. And it was. We never went out to eat ever again.
Oh, my.
Wow. Well, damn.
I remembered that so clearly. That,
Oh, yeah.
that
So
like, I will not act like that.
I logged that in my memory and said, okay, I'm not going to be that way. Instead, I just said that was very cold. And I was very proud of myself that that was my reaction.
Yeah.
Instead of, although I still respected my dad's reaction, I could understand just how
Yeah.
that was my dad. He was just, okay. So, when I hypothesize a soul that is eternal, since the physicists tell us, thanks to the time-space continuum, all time exists at once. So every single moment of your life is basically there in time and space for all eternity. I interpret that as the eternity version of this. That's not living for all time, so that I was clearly born at a certain point and I will die at a certain point. Hopefully a couple hundred years from now, right? So that will happen eventually when I guess I get bored of listening to Wagner or, something, I start liking sports again, maybe, or something.
No, don't do it. No.
I watch one Super Bowl a year.
Yes, it would.
I'll watch it for the commercials
Yes, exactly.
or for the halftime.
Oh, when you look at some of those commercials, they're absolutely fantastic. Best commercials of the year.
I watch it for my mother-in-law's food.
Perfect.
Food is also good when my family does the Super Bowl. They go all out, and I'm like, food. They're like, oh, are you interested in football? No, I'm here for food.
Well, the football is fun. Football is a fun game, and I think it's okay to watch at least one of them a year. That's all right, especially when it's supposed to be the best one, although it's not always the best one. But so what I'm thinking about, though, is the eternity, and I don't know how that works because, well, how does it work, right? We don't really have a time machine that we could use to go back and experience the past again or to change it, things of that sort. Not yet. Maybe someday we might, but of course that's going to be a very confusing situation. Theoretically, if we do invent a time machine that enables us to go back into the past, we already have, and we already do. Wouldn't that have to be the case? But obviously we're not telling us about it. But obviously they did do that in order to make sure that Trump got elected.
It's like the Tesla files.
Maybe that's why your daughters did that to you.
Oh,
They went back. And
that
said,
could be. That. Oh,
Yeah, we're gonna
they're
say
just
we-
being typical daughters, though.
But every time they go back and they see the result, and it always is in their favor, so they're like, let's keep
Maybe
going.
they change it each time a
Yeah.
little bit,
Yeah, and it's always in their favor. Daddy pays. I say keep paying. It's nice.
Well, but I hope that they're also considering how much is Daddy going to leave us.
The more you have to bring that up.
Because
Yeah.
if they get too much now, that's going to be
Less is
less.
left.
then, you know, and hopefully they're checking
Yeah.
how the arc of time, you know,
That's a
which
good
bends
point.
towards justice, right? You know,
Yeah.
hopefully, you know, is going to be actually doing them some good in the future, and not.
I think they'll take the memories, like you said, the memories along with the,
I hope so.
yeah.
I hope so.
Jesse writes in his will saying that you have the memories. That's all you need.
That's right. You had my youth.
Speaking of which, I mentioned, we were talking a little bit about him while everyone was out. The most recent article I read about him was that he discovered he had cancer, but he did have an operation. It was successful, but he's now on chemotherapy, so hopefully he's doing fine.
See, I think, from the ceremonial aspect, that this is an attempt to recuperate the natural world for our human experience of beauty and to revitalise that
So he
experience.
loves riding horses for a hunt. I don't think they actually shoot anything. It's a formal.
Good boys, he's actually very intelligent horse, this one.
I can think of his relationship with the horse. I woke up this morning and reached over and petted a Saint Bernard.
Realise that you're not dangerous and,
Same thing.
well, that's intelligent, yes.
There's that same kind of relationship we have with our pets.
I should think we should have another look at the other horse, perhaps, and then I'll get the fox round.
And then I saw a picture on the internet. I've seen it before, where they say it's cold outside, bring your pets inside, and
Oh,
it's a
yeah.
picture of a horse sitting on a couch in the
That is
living
funny.
room. You think, ha ha. There are some pets you just don't bring into the living room.
So I guess I ask the question, is your dog considered part of the natural world?
We're part of the natural world.
Well, but in the context of what he's talking about.
Mercedes, horse fan. Anybody else still